notation. Evaluate each function for the given values of x if possible. So the difference with these questions is that they are already giving us the graph, but they're not giving us the notation. So we don't have this notation. So we have to use the information that is given in the graph to answer their questions. So they're asking for the domain of this function. So the domain is all the possible values that you can input into this function. So as we can see, we know the values from 0 to 2. So we can find all the values, all the outputs for the inputs between 0 and 2. And that's it. There are no arrows, so there's nothing to indicate that we would know what the output would be at 3. The range is the range of values that the outputs fall into. So in this case, we start at 0 and we go up to 1. So now they're asking us to evaluate. So for 0, we can clearly see that it's 0 just based off of the graph, but for things like 3/2, it might be a little bit more difficult to figure out what it is just based off of the picture. So we should try to figure out what our function actually is. Well, the first part is one part of our function, and that is between 0 and 1, so this is the interval that we're working with, and I can say that this is the line y equals x, just because there is a slope of 1 and it is going through the origin. If we look at the second part of our piecewise function, so this interval, we're talking about from 1 to 2, and now we have to figure out what the rule is for this. So it has the same slope, but it's in the opposite direction, so it's negative x, and then it's adding 2 because it's shifted over. It's shifted up, because if you were to extend it out this way, you would see that the y-intercept is at 2 instead of 0. So that's how we can figure out what the rules are to help us evaluate these. So f of 1 is 1, and that's given by the graph, and you could double check by using our rule. F of 3/2, so we want negative 3/2 plus 2, which gives us 1/2. And then f of 5 does not exist because it is not a part of our domain, so we cannot determine what the function would give us. So now let's look at number 13. I'm going to want to figure out what our function is. So the domain here is from 0 to 4, because those are all the possible inputs that I can input into my function. The range is from 0 to 5, because those are all the y values. And now let's look and see what the functions are. So there's two pieces. So the first piece, the range is from 0 to 2, because it tells us that this point is 2, 5. And so then I can find the slope by the change in y over the change in x, so it's 5/2 x. And then the second half is between 2 and 4. And so it's going to be negative 5/2 x based off of the change in x and y. And there's a vertical shift up 10. And so now we use these to evaluate. So f of 0 is 0, 2 is 5, and 4 is 0. So I actually didn't even need to figure these out in order to evaluate these, but if they gave you a point, let's say 3, you would have to be able to use the rule, because to eyeball it without a precise graph would not work out so well. So that's how we sort of take the information that is given in a graph and break it down to figure out all of this information.